Okay, I have 11 o'clock on my clock, so I'm going to get started. What you're seeing on the screen is the Co-Teaching Models webinar, so hopefully you're in the right place. I am Jennifer Hagerman. I'll be presenting. The slide deck was actually created by one of my colleagues, Lori Hersick. She is kind of our guru that specializes in least restrictive environments and inclusive practices. So she has done this several times, so hopefully I do this justice filling in for her. There's my contact information. I'm one of the newer TAC members of the in the TAC team, training and consultation. I'm a staff developer and specializing in inclusive practices, least restrictive environments, and behavior. A little bit about my background. I was a special education teacher, emotional support for 22 years. I did that both in public school and outside of public school. And my experience in public schools, I did have several co-teaching situations. Again, this was, 20 years ago, so it looked very different than what it does today. But I'm sure you'll hear similarities in that. This is Lori's information. So for those of you that have questions following today's session that you would like further explanation of, or if you want to reach out to her, she's more than happy to help out. I know she does a lot of programs, a lot of work with teachers in schools and teams and working with co-teaching and things like that. So there's her contact information. If you have joined us over the last 2 days and today, we have our Zoom webinar meeting norms. We just want to let you know that engagement looks different for everyone. So if you want to put your video on, you're welcome to. If you want to put your picture up, that's perfectly fine too. We want to honor all perspectives. I know we're all coming from different situations and settings, and we all have a different kind of viewpoint on things. We want to honor all those viewpoints and assume good intentions for everybody here. We're all coming from the same place. We want the same things for our kiddos. Just a reminder about Act 48. We want to make sure that you complete your evaluations, not only to get your books if you're eligible, but also it helps us in looking in the future and how we want to arrange our webinars in the future. So for today, our webinar outcomes are, we'd like you to understand the co-teaching as a way to support the inclusion of struggling students and discover the 5 co-teaching models supported by PDE. So looking at this, if you look at strategies to support inclusion, with co-teaching, we're talking about having 2 trained staff in the room at all times, 2 experts, not an expert and a support staff, but 2 college-educated teaching professionals that are bringing a lot more to the table to help those students be successful. When we look at the definitions for co-teaching, have exactly what I just mentioned. You have the 2 or more certified staff, shared responsibility, a single group of students, a single space, a specific content area, and then that mutual ownership. So it's not one teacher's classroom and I pop in to help out. It's mutual ownership of this space. So looking at this idea of a definition, it's just an instructional delivery approach in which 2 or more certified professionals, again, that joint responsibility, that ownership, that they're both considered equals. Same idea here, just important that you have that sharing, that one person is not seen or perceived as being, in complete control. Here's some of the things that co-teaching is not. So again, like we said, with this, you're not one professional making all the decisions. It's not one professional predominantly assuming instructional lead while the other one just walks around and helps. That might be one of your strategies you're going to use within the room, but it's not the way it's run all the time. a professional working with the same group of students all the time. So, you know, I might be teaching the whole class, but you're going to pull out this group of students every time and work with them. That's not the way it should be. And also each professional working in isolation. I know when I was in public school with my ES students, if I had some that went into, we had a math class in particular, the teacher was really willing to have my students come in and be a part of that classroom, but we sat at the back table. My students and I went in, we sat at the back table, we followed along with the teacher's instruction, but I was expected to do all of the supplemental, all of the support, everything with that group of students. And we were just put at the table. We weren't even at the desks with the other students. So not an ideal co-teaching situation. So what does that effective co-teaching team look like? So we're talking about a partnership where both teachers have the equal responsibility. They equally will do any of the assessments, any of the instruction. They both take part in student successes. They both take part in parent communications. Again, you want that open line of communication in planning and preparation. So it's not, I'm the social studies teacher, you're the learning support teacher, so I'm going to develop all the social studies lessons because that's my content area. It's together planning that instruction. That learning support teacher may have some great ideas on strategies of bringing, you know, some sort of a lesson to life. So sharing that communication, open lines of communication and preparing those lessons. There is a balancing act. If one person has the content knowledge and one person may have the strategy knowledge, sharing that knowledge back and forth. You are going to come to the table with your level of expertise in your area, but you want to be willing to share that, not keep it all to yourself. And then just like I said, you want to honor the other person's perspective at the table also, knowing that they are coming with their own set of expertise, but willing to share back and forth. That open lines of communication is very important. So in looking at our 5 co-teaching models, so we have, here are the ones that PDE recognizes. We have 1 teaching, 1 observing and assisting. And as I said, that's a strategy, but it can't be the only thing that your building does in co-teaching. You may have station teaching. You may have alternative or differentiated teaching. There may be some parallel teaching going on or some team teaching going on. So we're going to delve into each one of those a little separately here. So in the 1 teach, 1 assist level, you're looking at this, a lot of times this is the way it's going to start out. As I said, when I went into the math classroom with my kiddos, I looked at the math teacher as the kind of leader in that role. He knew the curriculum, he knew what needed to be delivered to the students, and I kind of used myself as a support role, and that's how we got that relationship going. A lot of times, you know, it looks as it's the fewest demands placed on everybody because you have your area of expertise and you just go with that. But as it continues, you're going to have that level of feeling unsatisfied. And when I first went in, I was so thankful. I was, you know, I was one of the first ES teachers that was allowed to bring their students into the regular classroom. So I felt kind of proud that, you know, here I am, my kiddos are coming into this regular classroom. They're getting the regular, you know, the general ed curriculum. But as time went on, I kind of thought to myself, you know, I'm being paid a lot to be an assistant. You know, that's kind of the role that I was leading in that classroom. And after a while, I really felt that some of the skills and the strategies I was using with my little core group of students at the back table could have been used across the classroom. So as time goes on, that relationship, if you stick with this, both members aren't going to feel like they're, you know, giving their full potential. This is just some other details with this. You have that the teachers, 1 teacher would be primarily responsible for designing and delivering the lesson. And then the co-teacher would observe, listen, provide one-on-one tutorial as needed. So as I said, I kind of lived at the back table in this one. we're going to watch a quick little video. Each one of these strategies, I have a little clip to kind of show you what it looks like. And as I said, you'll see in this video that this is just one of the strategies they've used. It's not their entire, you know, this is what co-teaching is for them. This is just one of the strategies that they use. So we'll watch this and see what we think of it. Whoop. What happened? There we go.
In this strategy, one teach, one assist, one teacher acts as the primary teacher, while the other assists and supports the learners. In this demonstration, the primary teacher is a mentor, and the assists position of the lesson is carried out by a resident teacher. These two roles can be switched, depending on the strengths of each teacher and the content being taught. The co-teacher assists by monitoring student work, addressing behavior issues, answering student questions, distributing materials, or asking the lead teacher to clarify any developing student misconceptions.
If you have a class where you know that it's more of a behavior issue, it's really getting the students to be on task. And if you have a class where it's like the kids are more engaged and into it, then it's really asking them those, you know, higher level questions to make them think more, or if they're pair sharing, encouraging them to pair share.
This strategy is helpful when distributing materials during hands-on lessons or when closely monitoring student learning during lessons, and is meant to be used occasionally.
In this lesson, what I noticed that I was using a lot of was proximity with the students in monitoring their behaviors, also making sure that the students were at the same part of the worksheet, on task, and doing the same work as everybody else, as well as checking for some understanding, making sure that some of the students understood.
The benefits of having her in that role is that I'm able to kind of just relax and teach and, you know, just really kind of get into the moment of creating that experience for the students and not have to worry about all the little things that has to be supported. You know, I just know that there's somebody else in the classroom that's there for me while I'm teaching, and then when that person's teaching, I can be there for them too. So it's just nice having two people teach one lesson. When we plan our lessons, I guess we take a look at what the lesson is and then decide really who's teaching that specific lesson, and then automatically the other person would go into the one assist role if that's what we decided to do. She may take more of a lead in history, then I know I would be assisting her. Whereas, you know, science is more my thing sometimes, so she really would assist me in science. We are co-teachers, and when you set up your room, you know, you want to make sure that all of that is equal so the students really understand that it is.
Okay. One of the important things I think hopefully you heard in that video was that it's an occasional strategy. So again, just not the only thing that co-teaching looks like in your building. So here are some pros and cons. Just pros being you can use it in large and small groups. It requires little planning and it's easy to implement because you have the one person that is pretty much delivering that lesson. So it takes planning only on one part. And you can incorporate the progress monitoring for your IEP goals on that. You have that person that's able to monitor, sit back and monitor for some of the things. So as an example, with my emotional support students, I could sit back and monitor their paying attention on the lesson or completing a graphic organizer while they were listening, taking notes, things like that. I had the ability to kind of keep track of that for them. Cons, you have there that it's not true co-teaching unless each teacher takes turns in the active and passive roles. And if you listen to the two teachers there, they had their own specialty areas and the students were able to see them both as the lead teacher and the co-teacher. And that's really important that the one is not taking that role all the time. And then the other piece there, you can see that some groups of teachers get stuck there. They're not as willing to try some of the other methods because this one just seems to work. So we're going to move on to the next area. Anybody have any questions about the first one teach, one observe? I should let you know, you do have the chat function. Please feel free to type in the chat at any time or unmute. The more discussion we have, the better understanding we'll all have of this. Okay. So we'll move into station teaching. And if you look here, it just has the instruction is presented at centers or stations, each station containing a different aspect of the lesson, and the teachers work with small groups moving from station to station. So you have your particular thing going on at your area. So each teacher would develop the information for their station under the overall topic that you're trying to teach. Okay, so we'll watch this little clip on station teaching and see how this is a little different. I don't know why it's doing that the first time I click on it. There we go.
In this strategy, station teaching, the co-teachers divide their class into small groups to provide instruction at separate stations.
Station teaching is a chance for two teachers to work together and provide some individualized attention to smaller groups of students while covering several different pieces of the curriculum.
Sharon and Jan have divided their class into 4 small groups, and those groups rotate between specific stations, each station presenting different but often related content. Jan will teach Station 1, and Sharon will teach Station 3. At Stations 2 and 4, students will work independently, with both teachers monitoring their progress.
When you can get them in these groups, you can employ a lot of different strategies. For one thing, it's more sort of 1-on-7, which makes it more manageable. But the other thing is we can strategize who we put in the groups. We can also group by ability. So I can take some extra time with a group who maybe has fewer skills, and I can let the more independent learners work on their own. So it allows us to split our groups up into a variety of different configurations.
After a designated amount of time at each station, the groups will rotate.
And the nice thing about working with stations is we can really modify the curriculum to match what our students need, because it's much smaller pieces. It's not an hour of one topic. It's several small topics in shorter amounts of time.
Station teaching reduces the student-teacher ratio, increasing student participation and effective monitoring of the students.
I think you can also identify and feed into the curiosity of students better when you're in exploration stations, because you can actually see right in front of you somebody kind of, oh, this is grabbing my interest, and you can kind of run with that and make an educational moment out of it, and also a memorable moment and an engagement moment.
Since this is a highly engaging instructional format, teachers may need to manage the noise level in the classroom. To be effectively implemented, the activities at each station should function independently of each other and should require roughly the same amount of time to be completed. It is recommended that this strategy be used frequently to enhance learning outcomes.
Something that's really important to me as a teacher, I feel like the kids are being heard in the small groups a little bit more, because everybody gets a chance to speak. There's a lot of different models we can follow, but it's always together, and it's always with each other in mind and our students first.
So again, we have some pros and cons to this. It does provide that low student-pupil or teacher-pupil ratio. I know a lot of our class sizes, we're talking, 20, 25 students, which will be interesting to see with the whole COVID going back. But we're talking about these larger populations, and when you break them down into smaller groups, you have that more intensive area that you can focus on. We have both teachers working with all students. That's another big piece. If you were listening to Dr. Young, if you joined her this morning, talking about our students' needs, just because they're a special education student doesn't mean they're the only ones in the classroom that have certain needs. So if you break them into groups by needs, you may have a special education teacher and a regular education teacher in the classroom, but both of those teachers are going to provide strategies and provide learning to all of the students based on their need. So the special education teacher coming in isn't just going to provide those needs and those special things just for her special education students. It may be to all of the students. So that's kind of an ideal situation for all kids. You also have that each teacher has clear responsibility. You are developing your own activities within that large umbrella of a lesson. So you get to decide what you're going to do. You have your own set of responsibilities, which is a little easier to do. You have a smaller piece of that lesson that you're going to control. Cons, you do have that increased noise level. And I know that's something that we're all, aware of. If we have students with emotional disabilities in the classroom or levels of autism, that can be another thing. It could be a trigger for them. So that's something that's got to be considered when you look at your population of students, whether this is going to be a good fit for them. All the students have to move at the same time. So, it gives you that smaller group to focus on, but if they're not ready to move on and all the other 3 groups are, you kind of need to move the groups at all times. So it needs to be something within a lesson where you feel that you can reach and maximize that amount of time you have with them and be able to move them on. And then it's dependent upon effective planning. You really need to make sure, just as an easy thought in my mind, I mean, you're talking about 2 of those groups being independent because you have 2 co-teachers. Well, if you haven't provided enough to keep them independently working or giving them things that are on their independent working level, you may have students asking for help in those areas. You may have students that finish early and begin to talk and be silly and do other things. So there are a lot of pieces to this that you really need to make sure that you have limits set up ahead of time and that you've worked through this. Again, teaching the kids those limits that you want, and then working through that station teaching. And that's just another option when you think about co-teaching. Any questions on the station teaching before I move on?
I just posted in the chat that with COVID, station teaching is going to be hard, if not impossible, in the fall because of kids having to be with their own supplies and at their own desk. And it's sad because it is a good strategy as long as you don't overuse any of the 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm, if you're on social media, I'm sure you've seen there's some neat things that teachers are doing. I saw one where it was a co-teaching situation with special education students, and she had built, I think I've seen several of them now, with the PVC pipe and the shower curtains in between the desks, and the teachers were just going to move, but that station of 4 kids was going to stay together. And I know when we talk about grouping those kids by ability or whatever, that same group of kids may not be on the same level in reading and in math. And so you're right. It's going to, the planning and the preparation for this is going to be much more difficult to do a lot of these. Thank you for that. So moving on to parallel teaching. So this, if we look, it's the class divided into 2 heterogeneous groups, and you teach the same content at the same time. So most appropriate for drill and practice, reviews, project work, things like that. Let me advance this a second. This one was probably the most difficult for me to understand because I'm thinking in my head of the teacher up front and all the kids listening. How do you have 2 teachers up front? So this should give us a better picture of what that would look like, and then we can kind of talk about it.
In the parallel teaching strategy, the co-teachers divide the class in half and instruct them on the same material.
Parallel teaching is teaching the same lesson with half as many students. We divide that up so that children have more airtime and more teacher attention. Really draws them closer to the subject area that they need to be engaged in. So they go from 22 students down to 11 students in each group.
The primary benefit of this approach is that the student-to-teacher ratio is reduced, thereby allowing the co-teachers to maximize participation and minimize behavior problems during teaching.
It allows for better thought-out answers. The children have more time to to think about it. And one of the things I like about it too is that some kids, they kind of want to hide. And when we have them in a smaller group like this, there's less chance for them to hide. It's just nice sort of always having a smaller group to be able to have more rich discussion and vocabulary from the students.
In this class, co-teachers John and Michael are using table groupings to divide up their classroom. This will reduce the student-teacher ratio, and it will also increase instructional intensity.
The table groupings aren't random. They're grouped according to kind of a heterogeneous grouping, so that we have a good mix of EL students and higher and lower performing students.
With this approach, teachers will have to maintain control over the noise level so that the groups do not get distracted. In addition, timing is a critical part of this strategy because both teachers need to take roughly the same amount of time to complete the instructional segment. Teachers should try to use this strategy more frequently to allow for maximum student participation in the learning.
Usually when we're doing parallel teaching, that time can vary, but the attention span of a kindergartner is relatively short. And so from start to finish, you're looking at about 15 minutes. Parallel teaching is a great methodology when you want to focus on the deeper instruction or deeper learning just because of the small group. We're able to pay closer attention to the details and catch kids before they fall out the bottom. For today's purposes, we found it most convenient to divide up in those familiar groups that they normally work in, and it works very quickly, and they're right at home.
Okay. So parallel teaching, again, just another one of the strategies. You do have that small teacher to student ratio. You have the increased student participation. They're in a smaller group. You can call on more students and reach more students. The cons, and I'm sure that you've, just in watching that, probably have come up with several more than what are listed there. What they list is that it cannot be used unless both teachers are proficient in the content, which is true. As a special education teacher, and back when I was in public school as an emotional support teacher, I was in my first 5 years of teaching. So when you think about all the content that was being delivered in that I was in a building that was 5th through 8th, I was not competent in all those areas. I could not have walked into a 7th grade science classroom and been able to teach a lesson to the level that it needed to be taught. So you really need to make sure it's a lesson where both teachers feel comfortable and are competent in the material they're going to teach. And then the other issue with the noise level and activity can be very distracting. I know as I'm thinking about the noise level and activity, I did hear the point about, you have the kindergartners who their attention span, regardless of which group they're in, is going to be about the same. But if we got into a rich discussion and the other group didn't, and they get up and move to the table because they're done with their carpet work or whatever it was, my group, I'm just imagining the distraction from them seeing the other group being done and moving on to the next activity, and we're still sitting here. So I'm thinking, are any of you thinking of any other pros or cons to this level? If you want to drop any of those in the chat, you're welcome to.
One thing my co-teacher and I did last year before we were sent home, we wanted to try this method, and it's high school. So trying to keep some high school kids in Algebra 1 calmer. We actually took where one of us took half the group out into the hallway with whiteboards, and the other one stayed in the classroom. And then that way, because our classrooms weren't right by each other, now in our new building, we're closer to each other, so we won't lose time traveling.
Right.
But in our old building, we were farther away and we didn't lose that time of travel. So we just did it in the hallway, and it actually worked pretty well. And then when we did it the second time, we switched which group went in the hallway. So it wasn't the same group always out in the hallway.
Okay. Thank you. And I think another one of the keys here was when we talked about the other grouping for the stations and things, they were kind of grouped, you could kind of group them with their needs, where this is not grouped that way. This is a heterogeneous grouping. So you're gonna have your low, your high, your medium, you're gonna have quite a mix in both groups. Okay, so we'll move on to alternative teaching. And this is where one teacher is going to manage the larger instructional group. One teacher is going to manage that smaller group pulled to the side. The same students are not in the same group every time. So it's not just, as I said in the beginning, it's not just me at the back table with my ES kiddos and the rest of the 6th grade population up here at the board. Those groupings could change. I could be at the back table, but my group that comes to the back table could be different every time. This can be used for enrichment, remediation, assessment, pre-teaching, things like that. So we'll watch our video here and see an example of the differentiated teaching. Let's do that. There we go.
In this co-teaching approach, alternative or differentiated teaching, one teacher manages a large group of students, while the other takes a small group for a specific instructional purpose. In this particular teaching sample, a resident is managing the large group and a mentor is managing the small group, but their roles can be switched.
Alternative differentiated instruction is taking a small group of students separate from whole class, and you're either teaching them the same content material, or you use that small group away from whole class to provide intervention for students who might not have learned a concept previously.
It can also be used for enrichment for students who already have the concept, and we just want to take them a little bit farther than the other students are ready for.
This approach provides instructional flexibility and can be used for enrichment, remediation, assessment, or pre-teaching, as well as for alternative methods of providing lesson input.
We can reteach, we can enrich the students' needs, we can also do behavior modification and give the students the specific support they need to personalize their instruction. When we plan an alternative lesson, if a student is struggling in math and she was one to initially teach the concept and she's one to notice a student who is struggling in that area, we might have her teach the concept in a small group. Or we might think, you know what, the student needs a completely different person, different method of learning about it. So then I might be teaching the small group in order to just provide a different way of looking at things. If I have a stronger connection with the student, it might actually be a good plan for her to have the small group to make those connections with the students too. So then in the long run, we're both connected with all of our students.
Teachers using this strategy will want to pull students for a variety of purposes, so that this approach does not create a situation in which those instructed using this format feel labeled or stigmatized in any way.
They do wonder why they're chosen sometimes, so we've explained to them that all students have different needs. And they understand that. They realize as the school year goes along, we have a very safe classroom environment and we're all here to learn. And so everyone seems fine with when they're pulled back and when they're not pulled back.
This co-teaching approach should be used occasionally when it is needed to increase the performance of particular students or groups of students.
With differentiated instruction, I feel like I can really reach my students' specific needs. I really get to know the students and I can zero in on exactly what they need me to help them with. With a small group, they can feel like they're being heard and they can feel safe to ask questions to allow for their best understanding of the content. To a teacher that is looking to use alternative instruction for their students, I think it's wonderful, especially with the CoTeaching model, having someone else in the classroom who can support you in noticing the gaps in students' learning or the students who need to have that enrichment.
Okay. And again, we have some pros and cons. We do have that all students have the access to the curriculum. The essential information is front loaded or retaught to whomever needs it. And it can be used to provide enrichment. And that's another key piece there. We a lot of times think of special needs as being those kids that need the support or need the reteaching or the alternative strategies, but it also can be that group that is just, you know, I already know this, where am I going with this? Pulling a group and giving them that extra, those enrichment activities to kind of further their learning. The cons, just really being very cognizant of the groups that you're creating. So making sure that as you're grouping students, that they're not always the students that are pulled for a specific subject or all the time, making sure that we don't create that stigma for them. And then, you know, throughout different subjects, we know that our students have different needs for different areas. So making sure that they're not the ones pulled all the time for all of math or for math and reading and whatever, because they're the ES students or however it works. Okay. Then we have our team teaching. So just in this description, you have the general education and the special education teachers that have joint responsibilities for teaching and assessing all content to all students. And that's really important. So when we look at, you know, the assessments and the, you know, if I'm thinking of behavior modifications and things, it wouldn't just be the special education teacher in there doing all the monitoring, all of the assessing, all of the teaching to those special ed students, that they both have the responsibility to teach them and to assess their needs, assess and continue to help the students make that progress. So check out our video here.
In this approach, team teaching, both teachers are often in front of the classroom, sharing the responsibilities of lead instruction.
An example of collaboration is we expect our kids to collaborate so often together, and they don't have a model of that a lot of times in a classroom that only has one teacher. And when we can work together to team teach, we can show how to collaborate so that when we ask them to go work with partners or with groups, they have an example of how to do that.
Another variation of team teaching is when both co-teachers have different but equally active roles in a lesson. One teacher might lead the discussion, and the other teacher might record notes on the overhead projector.
And then if she is up there teaching and I know that they're not understanding it, it's easy for me to say, you, come with me. And, you know, we go to the side. And I would redo the same thing. It's reteaching right there exactly the step that they're being confused on so they can have that deeper understanding, grow from that understanding right then.
Both teachers are fully engaged in lesson delivery. The teachers must also work well together in terms of gauging their contributions so that lesson pacing is maintained.
When I'm up there, I forget, you know, my detail, my examples. When we team plan, she remembers there's something and she'll bring it up. Then yeah, we can kind of check each other in a way that's positive without going, oh no.
This approach can be energizing. There is often an entertainment factor present as the teachers interact with one another, and this often increases student attentiveness and engagement. When this strategy is used, the instructional conversations and the sharing of question asking and answering can benefit students as they hear different styles of thinking.
There's something that they don't understand. There's one of us roaming around, so scaffolding is happening all the time. You know, it's easier, and the opportunity for the students to ask us questions is just a lot easier for them. And I think being able to say things in different ways, if I think about something in a different way and I'm able to express that to the students, and then Maylee can say it the way she's done it, so we're reaching the larger number of our class.
In addition, teachers are able to emphasize their strengths in a lesson segment, and teacher creativity is often enhanced using this approach.
Most of the time, we actually just plan the lesson first and then decide who wants to do what part, depending on our strengths. You know, if it's something that I feel that she's better at, she can do more of the direct instruction. But most of the time, if it's a team teaching task, then it's usually half and half.
This strategy should be used occasionally, as some of the more subtle student needs can be missed when grouping is not being used.
It's supporting student learning, just being able to model collaboration and model working together, and showing that it's okay that if you forget, it's okay to have somebody support you and have your back.
Okay. So looking at the pros of team teaching, we have here that with capitalizing on everyone's strengths, large amounts of complex curriculum can be covered. They have advantages of both teacher styles. So when you're up there kind of in the play together, the students can pick up on, they tend to figure out which one that they can follow better, which one they have both of them there to choose from. And then we have a great thing here for point number 4. Students with disabilities are often indistinguishable. They're all in the same group. Nobody is pointing out that they can't follow along or they can't keep up. You're just rolling with it and they're mixed in with everybody else. And all students can benefit from the expertise of both professionals in the classroom. So all of the students, again, going back to Dr. Young's presentation this morning, just because you have an IEP doesn't mean you're the only one in the room that has a need. As far as cons, it does take a lot of time to build that trusting relationship between teachers. When I think back to when I was in the public school with my ES kiddos, the math teacher wasn't that much older than me. I think only had maybe 2 more years experience teaching than me. But it would have taken a lot of work for him to see me as an equal in being willing to, first of all, share the curriculum with me, and second of all, share that teaching point with me. That would have been a really difficult, would have taken a lot of work on both of our parts. We also have to make sure in this kind of a situation that both teachers are proficient in the content. If you are primarily a special education teacher and you're going into, say, a specific, I know Stacy mentioned being in a high school, and some of those science curriculums are extremely daunting when you're not, you know, you haven't learned that yourself. So you need to make sure it's an area that you feel comfortable being a part of that instruction and that you know the material good enough to deliver that. And then you need to make sure that planning and prep time is there. And I know that's another thing that's really difficult. I mean, planning time, prep time, I know in my role as a special education teacher, I rarely had it. Most of my prep periods did not exist. I had students all day long, and those times would have been on my own outside of school hours. And to find a regular education teacher who was willing to stay extra hours or come in early and meet with me to plan that would have been a little difficult. And again, I'm talking 20 years ago. I'm hoping and praying things have changed, but the planning and prep time for everyone is going to be more difficult in that realm. So you have, when you think about the approaches to co-teaching, you have a couple that fall into the large group category and the rest fall into the small group. So in that large group, when you're talking about the whole group as one, you could do that one teach, one assist, or that team teaching model. And then you have all the students, regardless of their disability category, their need, anything, they're grouped together. Small grouping, again, you have the station teaching, the parallel teaching, and alternative teaching, and those groupings are going to be different. Some of them are heterogeneous, some of them are homogeneous, depending on their ability levels. Lori has included some more resources on this one if you have more information you'd like to look at. Again, as I mentioned, she's kind of our lead guru. I'm only a few months into this, so if you have questions that I can't answer, please feel free to reach out to her. And then don't forget to do the evaluation. And right there is our schedule for the rest of today's webinars. I hope you attend, and I really appreciate you attending this one. I'm going to leave the room open if anybody wants to share any experiences they've had with co-teaching, positive or negative, or any strategies maybe different than what we've shared here today. I'd be happy to entertain those. You can just unmute yourself and share if you're welcome to do that. If you have nothing else, you're welcome to go. And I, again, thank you for joining us this morning.
One thing I want to share that you mentioned too, I'll be starting year 23 of teaching, and it's all been special education at the high school. And back in the 20 years